Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Buddhist Insights Monk Chat. So we're here with Aya Sobana, who's currently at Empty Cloud Monastery in New Jersey, USA. And my name is Bhante Sudaso, and I'm currently in Italy, where we're setting up another monastery here. And this is the weekly Monk Chat session, which is your opportunity to ask questions about Buddhism, and our opportunity to try to give relevant and useful responses based upon the Buddha's teachings. So please feel free to type in questions at any time, and we will respond to questions as they appear. And when we run out of questions, then we will conclude the session for the week. So we can start at this point with reciting homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami.
Excuse me, Bhante, there was a question yesterday evening, or Wednesday evening, that I did not respond to well enough, and I would like to answer that question again.
Okay. Yes, please
the question was, if a person experiences dissociation and terror, well, the topic was about experiencing fear during deep meditation. And the question was, if they experience dissociation, is that what is indicated by that fear? After thinking about it, I believe dissociation is a serious psychological, possibly dangerous psychological condition. And if somebody is experiencing that, they should come out of meditation. They should find some skillful and caring conversations with another person, and some ordinary life activities to reestablish their grounding. But if they are experiencing, if they're not mentally, psychologically ill, and they experience fear during meditation, they should stay in the meditation and overcome the fear.
Yeah, definitely. I would just add to that so dissociation often includes a loss of body awareness or reduction of body awareness, of mindfulness of the body. So just really reestablishing an intense, clear awareness of one's own body. And it's good to also remember that the body experience does not disappear until the fourth jhana at the earliest, and there's debate about whether it disappears even then. So if somebody's body is disappearing during meditation, then definitely something is usually going wrong. So yeah, really reestablishing awareness of the body is really critical for keeping the mind from becoming unanchored. So I see a lot of people checking in online. Hello to Uttara, Mrs. Sri Lanka, Manal, Harry, Jayanta, Kauser Friend, Maria, Gregory, Lou, Sud, Yana, and Amparo. It's good to see all of you checking in. What I don't see is any questions. Here's a question. So Kauser Friend says, recently in metta meditation, I was dealing with a lot of sadness and was never really able to find my way to the sort of metta experience I know from other sits. In this case, should I just keep trying or should I do something else? Ayasovana, what do you think?
It's predicted that for some people, practicing loving kindness indeed could cause an outpouring of grief that perhaps otherwise has been suppressed. So first to know that this is something that's rather normal, something that can happen. And I would actually suggest not giving up on the metta practice, but shifting to compassion for oneself and all beings with visualizing being able to emerge from that grief, emerge from that sorrow as the compassionate wish, and to continue the meditation.
Yeah, I would also add to that. So again, I think Ayasovana's suggestion is a really good one. Another thing you might try is switching to gratitude meditation. So gratitude towards the Buddha, gratitude towards your spiritual teachers, gratitude towards everyone that's helped you along the path, gratitude for the opportunity to train the mind. So cultivating gratitude in this way tends to naturally bring a lot of joy to the mind. Then we have a question from Sud. Sud says, would having a view that there are still living Arahants in the world, whether some particular person is or not is a different story, brings great joy and motivation to practice? Is this okay, or is this just more delusion and stories that one shouldn't get involved in? Personally, I think it's fine. I mean, just going with statistics, there's about 10 million Buddhist monks in the world, so 10 million bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. Odds are pretty good that a few are Arahants. So I'm hesitant to say with absolute certainty that there's X number of Arahants in the world, but I'd say odds are pretty good there's a few. So if that's something that brings joy and motivation, I think it's fine. Ayasovana, do you have any thoughts on this?
It's possible that the Arahants in the world are not on the internet. Likely. So that actually that confidence is, in my opinion, a good thing. You would have to be rather cynical to think that there's no more Arahants in the world.
Yeah. And Sud also asks, how can one use devanusatti to motivate one's practice? Ayasovana, do you want to talk about devanusatti?
Right. This is not so much practiced in the Theravada. Our modern Theravada teachers, even though it's advised in the suttas, very few, if any, of the famous well-known teachers in the Theravada emphasize this practice. You, in a certain way, you see it more like in the Tibetan tradition when you visualize the image of one of the Buddhas as a radiant image, and that's a part of a way of making the mind bright, lifting up the heart, bringing up that joy, which would be a very good preliminary practice to meditation. So the devas, the reason they come to be devas is because of their wholesome, meritorious deeds. And so with that reflection and with well grounded in sila and having also the intention for oneself that my own sila will be as excellent as it can be, and that I shall have the protection of the precepts for my welfare and happiness. I'm not sure why in the sutta they don't mention a brahmanusatti, as different from the devanusatti. So the devas and the brahmas can be disciples of the Buddha, as some of them are. The devas are still subject to sensual desire, and the brahmas have gone beyond sensual desire and are living in a pure realm of loving kindness in the Brahma Viharas.
Okay, good. And Harry says, can you talk about how the mind shapes our experiences of contact to create different Vedana? Well, I mean, one of the most simple and direct examples of this is just in terms of our preferences. So sensory contact in and of itself is just sensory information. It's just raw data about sensory experience. But then we have our preferences of we like this, we prefer this, we hate that, we would rather not have it. And so then that shapes our experience. That makes things pleasant or painful. Or if we're not interested in something, then we tend to ignore it, not really pay any attention to it. So then it becomes blurry and unclear, or even a complete blank spot in our experience. So this is a very clear example of it, is just in terms of preferences, which then shapes how we see things as pleasant or painful or neutral. And also whether we experience something as an intense experience or as something so insignificant that we don't even notice. And another example of this is again with the distortion of perception associated with preference. So there's kind of the classic example of like when you're infatuated with someone, then they look very beautiful and radiant, and everything they do is the cutest thing and the most charming thing, and it's all, every sensory contact involving that person seems wonderful. But then maybe a bit later on you start hating that person, and then it switches. Now they're not beautiful and radiant and charming anymore. Now they're kind of like ugly and irritating and annoying, and everything they're doing is problematic, and you don't like the way they talk, and you don't like the way they walk, and you don't like that little crease that forms on their forehead. And so the mind starts forming a completely different experience based upon one's preferences that one is filtering the experience through. So preference is a very clear example of how we distort our sensory experiences. And another big part of the distortion of sensory experience comes through our pre-existing opinions and ideas. So this is how delusion and grasping at beliefs and opinions distorts our experience. If we believe things are a certain way, then we will tend to automatically rewrite our sensory input to match our pre-existing opinions. One of a classic story that Ajahn Brahm tells about this was of a university professor who invited a bunch of scientists to a demonstration. So he got all of them in an auditorium and said, I'm now going to demonstrate telekinesis. I'm now going to prove to you that telekinesis is real. And these were all scientists who were skeptical and saying, of course, this is fake, this is not real. And the professor had a metal ball on a table in the middle of the auditorium. And he said, we're all going to chant Om together. And as we chant Om, this ball is going to levitate up off the table. And he got the whole room chanting Om, Om, Om. And slowly the ball started to levitate up a few inches and then gradually settled back down to the table. And the professor asked the room, who here saw the ball levitate? We all just did telekinesis. We levitated this ball with the power of our minds. Who saw that? And all the scientists in the room said it didn't happen. The ball never left the table. Telekinesis isn't real. This is all some weird practical joke you're playing. This isn't real. But the guy had actually had video cameras positioned around the room, and he played back the video feed, which clearly showed the ball actually did lift up off the table. And then he explained the trick, which was that there was an electromagnet under the table. And the point of getting everyone chanting Om was to cover up the sound of the electromagnet powering up to create a magnetic field that would elevate the ball a little bit. But he said the point wasn't about telekinesis, it was to show how our pre-existing beliefs distort our sensory data. Because the people in the room believed that telekinesis was impossible, they actually rewrote the experience they were having in order to match their pre-existing beliefs. So this I find incredibly interesting because this is something we're doing all the time. We have our pre-existing beliefs about reality, and we constantly filter and rewrite our experiences to match our pre-existing beliefs. And this is something that we can only really overcome through incredibly well-developed mindfulness of body and mind. And also the willingness to accept that we might be fundamentally delusional and constantly distorting our experience. So those are a few thoughts on this question. Ayasobana, do you have anything further to add?
Exactly, that our experience with the contact is conditioned by what we expect. The contact itself is not the same thing as the subsequent proliferation of thoughts and stories, but the thoughts and stories that we make conditions our subsequent experiences with contact. It is a dynamic process between the body and mind. So some babies are extremely sensitive and reactive to contact, and some babies are not disturbed by the very same contact. So that's something that's purely coming from the genetic or bodily qualities of that individual. But then through a lifetime, what's experienced with the body conditions the stories that we hold. And developing stories which are wholesome in the sense that they are leading towards the truth, leading towards tranquility, and leading us away from craving and reactivity. And then with those stories, it's possible to retrain the mind so that subsequent contacts won't create the same reactions anymore.
Yeah. And Jill says, how do I get started on this? Jill, if you could clarify what you're asking, get started on what exactly? If you mean Buddhism in general, then I recommend going to a Buddhist temple. I recommend visiting some Buddhist monasteries. I recommend reading some Buddhist scriptures. I recommend practicing kindness and patience and doing a little bit of meditation every day. These are all things that are helpful. Ayasobana, anything to add? Okay. And then Sud says, does harsh speech break the 5 precepts? What if you have to skillfully use harsh speech for someone's own good and development? For example, my teachers used harsh speech with me when training me at my job, and it actually made me better at my job. Actually, what comes immediately to mind is the Abhaya Rajakumara Sutta, the discourse to Prince Abhaya, where Prince Abhaya asked the Buddha, would you ever speak in a way that was displeasing to someone? And the Buddha replied, there is no one-sided answer to that question. And the Buddha then asked Prince Abhaya. Prince Abhaya had a baby in his lap, and the Buddha asked Prince Abhaya, what would you do if that baby put a stick or a stone in its mouth? And Prince Abhaya said, well, naturally, I would put my hand in its mouth and take it out. And the Buddha said, well, what if the baby didn't like it? What if it was painful to the baby for you to pull out that stone? And Prince Abhaya said, well, I would do it anyway because I have compassion for the child. And the Buddha said, in the same way, an awakened being knows the right time to use displeasing speech, disagreeable speech. So this is, and he says why? Because he has compassion for sentient beings. So this is pointing to the case of someone who has strong wisdom. Someone whose wisdom is very well developed can sometimes speak in ways that seem rough or unpleasant or uncomfortable to other people, but it's done from a mind of compassion and a genuine wish to help others. However, we do also have the clear instruction in the Noble Eightfold Path to not engage in parasa vacha, which is commonly translated as harsh speech or rough speech. But that is speech which is unnecessarily aggressive, rude, hurtful, harmful, using speech in a way that is inconsiderate, that is not considerate of the impact on the other people. So using speech in a way which is not compassionate. So that's a very different thing. So avoiding harsh speech means not using speech in a way which is unnecessarily disturbing or upsetting or harmful to other people. Ayasobana, do you have any further thoughts on this topic?
The continuation of Sud's question is about our speech on the job. This is something that's a caution that we experience as monastics. We have to always be very clear that the goal is not to have the chores of the monastery be done up to a standard of excellence and to have the committee always do their work really well. But instead, we're not treating people as employees, as instruments that we're trying to get something from them, except the only thing is for each person to attain as much realization as they're capable of. So at all times, our speeches really should be interested in the welfare of people. And you would hope that your boss at work also has got a concern for the happiness and welfare of the employees.
Okay. And Matiselete, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. This person says, can a layperson get the most out of the teachings, or is being a monastic the only way to attain realizations? Ayasobana, what do you think?
A person who's completely taken up with living a life of sensual pleasure, or who's completely taken up with living a life of aggression and hatred, might not be able to get very much out of the teachings. Although with a shock treatment, maybe they would get something out of it. But a layperson can certainly attain some realization. And it's the monastic way is easier than the householder's way, because householders are subjected to so many different forces, and the monastics are living in a community which has got a unity of purpose. But it's certainly possible for a layperson to obtain realizations.
Okay. And then Harry says, as a follow-up question, is Yathabhutañanadassana the experience of seeing, contacting phenomena without the overlay of preferences and conditioning? I would say, yeah, that's a major part of it. So knowing and seeing things accurately, clearly as they are. Yeah, that means seeing things objectively. It's seeing it without the distortion of preference and opinion. Yeah. Ayasobana?
Agreed.
Okay. And Gregory said, is mild autism an obstacle to the practice? Are certain Buddhist practices better suited for those with autism? Honestly, I don't think it really makes any big difference. I mean, I think severe psychological disorders can be problematic, but mild autism, I've actually known a lot of Buddhists who had varying degrees of autism, and they seem to be able to practice just as well as anybody else. I didn't really notice a significant difference. Ayasobana, what do you think?
Right. A person who has some level of autism might not be as natural or as intuitive in practice of loving kindness, because autism is a disability about the social interactions, or the emotional empathy is sometimes has to be done intentionally instead of happening intuitively and naturally. So I would suggest that a person with autism make an extra effort on that side.
Yeah. And then difference is spreading. I think that's what that says. Difference is spreading says, can we be addicted to the idea that we are wise enough to use rough speech? Do you think it is possible to have a spiritual status delusion and to use harsh speech as a status symbol? I would say always err on the side of gentle speech. Unless you're absolutely 100% certain that using stronger words is the most compassionate option. But realistically, unless your wisdom is extremely well developed, you have a high risk of just creating bad karma and also harming the other person. So I think gentle speech is always the safe option. I would not personally recommend using strong speech. And people who actually do have enough wisdom to use stronger language, they know for themselves. So if there's any doubt in your mind, then you're probably not in a position to be using harsher ways of communication, and you should probably stick to the gentle methods. Ayasopana, what do you think?
In some cultures, it's expected that parents and authorities would use harsh speech. And in the American culture, harsh speech is not accepted in that same way, just because somebody is an authority figure. So using harsh speech would not reinforce making you be more respected, but instead, in our American culture, would make people think you're a fool. So I think that that's even more reason, at least in the West, to be err on the side of gentle speech.
Yeah, I mean, I would just point out there that you did point out American culture. So this is to some degree culturally dependent. So for example, I'm currently here in Italy where by American standards, just the normal way that people speak all the time is a bit on the rough and harsh side. But in this cultural context, that's not a problem because that's just what's considered normal. So there's also a bit of adaptation to whatever culture you're currently in. The important thing is the underlying attitude. So you can tell when you're using harsh speech from a place of hostility or irritation or impatience, there's a distinct feeling in the mind. The mind feels a little bit dirty. The mind feels a little bit gross when you're using harsh speech from that kind of motivation. But sometimes you're just speaking in a way which is very direct and clear and culturally relevant to the context that you're in. And if that is actually the case, then there won't be that kind of dirty, nasty feeling inside the heart when you're speaking in that way. So I would really encourage looking at your heart. What's the attitude, the intention, the emotion that's accompanying the way you're speaking? And Mati Salete says, if I may add a follow-up, how can I, as a lay person, use the Dhamma to the best of my abilities? Do you recommend any sutras or specific practices? Ayasopana, what do you think?
The sutras, there are a number of sutras that are given to lay people, and there are many anthologies and collections that have selections of sutras that are oriented towards lay practitioners. Indeed, for the past months, my colleague Samanera Nipako has been offering the online teachings that can be found on the YouTube, and he's been selecting only those teachings which are particularly directed towards lay people as a thematic focus for those talks. So that would be one suggestion. Definitely vipassana and mindfulness is an excellent practice for lay people. Even if the mind is very troubled by all kinds of afflictions and difficulties and shortcomings and weaknesses or whatever you think you might have, every situation can be usefully investigated and held with mindfulness. So the practice of mindfulness and loving kindness, breath meditation, are those 3 practices that are good for everybody.
Good. And Kaiser Friend says, as my samatha progresses, I often get to a point where I drift off despite having a calm, collected concentration up to that point, like falling asleep, but not quite. Does this sound familiar? And what can I do about it? Well, I mean, honestly, I think that what's probably happening is that as your tranquility is growing, the tranquility starts to overpower your mindfulness. It starts to overpower your alertness. And as your alertness then drops and the tranquility grows, then you get to a point where the mind just starts shutting off. So this is actually quite common. And on the one hand, it's a good sign because it's a sign that your tranquility is developing. So that's actually useful. But it means that you need to put extra effort into keeping the mind very sharp, alert, and intensely clearly aware of your experience. So if this sort of thing is happening, I recommend, first of all, meditate with your eyes slightly open. Don't close your eyes all the way. If you're having this kind of problem, don't close your eyes during meditation. Keep them slightly open. And really focus on feeling your body as intensely as possible. Like turning up the volume or turning up the brightness. You want to feel your body at maximum volume, maximum brightness, maximum resolution at all times. And that will help to keep the mind from slipping into this kind of blurry dullness kind of state that you're talking about. Ayasomana, do you have anything to add on this?
Only to add that this drifting is one of the expected problems, which is described in the Upakilesa Sutta that we spoke about night before last on Wednesday. So it's specifically a danger for one who is coming close to samadhi, and it should be eliminated. In addition to what Bhante recommended, making the effort to be able to learn how to be aware of the state of mind which is present. That takes some practice because most people are not that self-aware at that level. So if you develop the Chittanupassana as well as the Kayanupassana, that will help to be able to notice when the mind is starting to drift away.
Good. Yeah. And I don't see any other questions. So if no other questions are appearing, then that might be the conclusion of our monk chat session for this week. Thank you, Ayasobana, for your wonderful Dhamma comments, and to all of our friends joining online for all of your delightful questions. And I recommend to prepare questions ahead of time so that next monk chat you can have your questions ready to go. And we can start off with a good list of things to talk about. So for now, we can conclude the session with 3 sadhus together. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.